Have you ever had days when you just can't seem to be productive, even though you know you have deadlines to meet and important things to do? Those days when your mind seems stuck in an endless cycle of distractions and procrastination, and you wonder, what's wrong with me? Maybe you've tried making to-do lists, applying productivity techniques, or even watching motivational videos, but nothing seems to work. What if I told you that the root of the problem may lie in something you haven't fully realized yet? Something that's deep down, silent, but incredibly powerful: trauma. That's right, trauma can be the greatest saboteur behind your productivity. And we're not just talking about major traumatic events like accidents or profound losses. Trauma can take more subtle forms and still profoundly impact your mind, your behavior, and of course your ability to perform day-to-day tasks. And that's exactly what we're going to explore today. In this video, I want to take you on a journey to understand how trauma affects your productivity in ways you may never have considered. But before we get into that, I want you to know, no matter what you've been through, there are ways to overcome these challenges. Trauma doesn't have to be a life sentence. With the right tools, you can start to take back control of your mind, your emotions, and your life. Now, you might be thinking, but what does trauma have to do with my inability to finish that project or clean my desk? In fact, it has everything to do with it. Trauma isn't just a painful memory stored in the past. It's something that, if left untreated, continues to live in the present, shaping your decisions, reactions, and even your ability to focus on a simple task. It turns out that trauma directly affects the functioning of the brain, especially the areas responsible for emotional regulation, focus, and decision-making. This means that even if you're physically present in front of your computer or in a meeting, your mind may be stuck somewhere else, a place that's always trying to avoid discomfort or protect you from something that's already happened. And this can make simple tasks seem overwhelming and your productivity plummet. But don't worry, just being here, watching this video, is a big step in itself. The first step, in fact, is understanding the problem. Because when you understand how trauma is affecting your life, you can start working to reverse those effects. And that's what I'm going to show you today: how to recognize the signs that trauma is impacting your productivity, and more importantly, how to start taking action to overcome those challenges. If you stick with me until the end, I'll share some practical, life-changing strategies that can completely change the way you deal with trauma and productivity. I'll show you how small changes in the way you view and manage your emotions can have a huge impact on your ability to get things done and achieve your goals. So, since you're here, I want to ask you something. Subscribe to the channel right now and turn on notifications. Why? Because this video is just the beginning. If you're looking for ways to improve your productivity and quality of life, I bring weekly content that can make all the difference in your journey. And what's more, by subscribing, you help spread this message to more people who may be facing the same challenges as you. Now, before we get into the details, I want you to reflect for a moment. Have you ever felt that your performance at work or in your studies was affected by something that you couldn't clearly identify? Something that seemed to be in the back of your mind, but that never fully showed itself? If so, you're not alone, and it's not your fault. Trauma is something complex, but completely possible to manage and overcome. Today, in this video, I'm going to help you understand this in a practical and accessible way. We're going to talk about what trauma is, how it manifests itself in your productivity, and of course, what you can do from now on to change this situation. Because trust me, you deserve to live a productive, balanced, and fulfilling life, and trauma doesn't have to be a permanent obstacle in your path. So stay with me until the end and discover how to transform your relationship with trauma and ultimately unlock your true potential. Let's join you on this journey to more conscious productivity and a more fulfilling life. Are you ready? Let's get started. When we hear the word trauma, We often think of extreme, devastating events, serious accidents, tragic losses, or violent situations. But what few people realize is that trauma can be much more subtle. It can be hidden in the little things we experience throughout our lives, things that, on the surface, may seem harmless, but leave deep scars on our minds and behaviors. Imagine, for example, a child who grew up hearing constant criticism. Phrases like, "You never do anything right," or "Why can't you be more like your brother?" may seem like simple reprimands to an adult, but to a child's developing mind, these words can be interpreted as, "I'm not good enough," or "Nothing I do is worth it." These internalized messages don't disappear as a child grows up. They linger, shaping unconscious beliefs and creating a predisposition to feel inadequate or insecure. Now think about how this manifests itself in your adult life. Do you have difficulty starting projects because you fear that the outcome will never be good enough? Or maybe you avoid taking on bigger responsibilities at work because you're afraid of failing. These behaviors, often attributed to procrastination or lack of discipline, can be direct reflections of past trauma. Trauma doesn't have to be a single major event. It can be cumulative, the result of repeated small experiences that overload our emotional systems. Imagine your mind as a glass jar. Each challenging or negative experience is a drop of water. One drop alone doesn't have much impact, but over time, if these drops continue to accumulate without being processed, the jar overflows. This overflow is what we call trauma activation, and it can profoundly impact our ability to function in our daily lives. A common example of cumulative trauma is chronic stress at work. Maybe you have a boss who frequently makes disrespectful comments, or colleagues who create a competitive and toxic environment. Over time, this constant pressure activates your brain's survival system, putting it in a permanent state of alert. And guess what? When your brain is focused on survival, it doesn't have the energy or space to be creative, productive, or efficient. Another example is relationship trauma. If you've ever been in an abusive relationship or a toxic friendship, you may have developed patterns of thinking and behaving that limit your ability to trust others or even yourself. This can translate into difficulty working in a team, fear of asking for help, or a constant need to prove yourself. The impact of this on your day-to-day life is devastating. You may feel like you're always running around, trying to compensate for something you can't even clearly identify. It may be hard to finish tasks because your brain is constantly scanning for threats or distracting itself with intrusive thoughts. Or you may feel exhausted, even after a full night's sleep, because your mind never truly rests. But what's most intriguing, and also most concerning, is that many people don't realize they're being affected by trauma. They get used to living with feelings of exhaustion, tension, or dissatisfaction, believing that this is normal. You may have found yourself thinking, "This is just the way I am. I can't change." But the truth is, that's not who you are. It's the impact of trauma on your system. And how does trauma specifically affect productivity? Well, it sabotages you in several ways. First, it drains your mental energy. When you're in a constant state of alert, trying to avoid emotional triggers or deal with feelings of inadequacy, there's very little room for focus or creativity. Second, it robs you of your ability to plan. Your brain is so busy trying to put out emotional fires that it can't think strategically about what needs to be done. And third, it increases procrastination. Why start a task if there's an internal voice telling you that you won't be able to finish it satisfactorily? But here's the most important point. Trauma doesn't define you. It's a part of your experience, but it doesn't have to be the label you carry around with you forever. The first step to overcoming it is acknowledging it, looking at your own history with honesty and compassion, understanding that many of the difficulties you face today have roots in events from the past, and that's okay. Throughout this video, we'll explore ways to recognize the signs that trauma is impacting your productivity and, more importantly, how you can start building a path to overcome it. Because the truth is, as powerful as trauma is, your ability to transform and grow is even greater. If you're starting to realize that there's something in your past that might be affecting your life today, don't worry. You're not alone on this journey, and in the next few steps, we'll guide you so that you not only better understand what's happening, but also know how to take action to change it. To understand how trauma affects your productivity, we first need to look at what happens in the brain when you experience something traumatic. When you're faced with a situation that your body perceives as a threat, whether it's a major event or even something seemingly minor like harsh criticism, your brain goes into a mode called fight, flight, or freeze. This survival mechanism, while useful in extreme situations, can become problematic when it remains constantly activated even after the threat has passed. Trauma has a direct impact on two key areas of the brain, the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. The amygdala is like the brain's fire alarm. When it detects something that could be a threat, it triggers an emergency response, activating stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline. This prepares the body to react quickly. However, in people who carry unresolved trauma, the amygdala can become overactive. It detects threats where none exist, like a critical email from your boss or a casual comment from a colleague. The result? You spend much of your day in a state of alertness, which drains your energy and ability to focus. Now, the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for functions such as planning, decision-making, and emotional regulation, suffers the opposite effect. When trauma takes over, this part of the brain becomes less active. In simple terms, your ability to think clearly, organize ideas, and carry out tasks is compromised. It's like trying to work with the Wi-Fi constantly dropping out. You can try, but everything becomes more difficult, time-consuming, and frustrating. In addition, trauma also impacts the hippocampus, which is the part of the brain responsible for processing and storing memories. When you experience something traumatic, the hippocampus may have difficulty processing that memory properly. Instead of storing it as a past event, it keeps it active in the present. This means that even if the experience happened years ago, your body and mind may react as if it were happening now. For example, imagine that you were constantly humiliated in meetings at your previous job. Now, in your current job, every time you're called into a meeting, you feel the same fear and discomfort, even though no one did anything to cause it. Your brain has learned to associate meetings with danger, and this unconscious association directly affects your ability to be productive in those situations. Another significant impact of trauma is what we call decision fatigue. When you're constantly dealing with intrusive thoughts or worries related to the trauma, your brain spends an enormous amount of energy just trying to maintain emotional balance. This leaves fewer mental resources available to make important decisions or even perform simple tasks. Have you ever felt drained before you've even started your day? This is a classic example of how trauma can drain your energy before you even have a chance to be productive. And of course, we can't ignore the role of negative emotions. Trauma is often accompanied by feelings of guilt, shame, or fear, which can manifest in subtle but damaging ways. Maybe you procrastinate because deep down you believe you're not good enough to do the task at hand. Or maybe you avoid taking on new projects because you fear failure. These behaviors are not character weaknesses. They are unconscious strategies that your mind has developed to try to protect you from the pain associated with trauma. The impact of trauma on productivity is also felt physically. Chronic stress from trauma can lead to physical symptoms like headaches, muscle tension, and digestive issues, which make it even harder to concentrate and perform. In addition, trauma can disrupt sleep, which creates a vicious cycle. Poor sleep reduces your ability to focus and solve problems, which increases feelings of inadequacy and, in turn, intensifies the impact of trauma. If you're wondering how all of this directly connects to your productivity, here's the gist. Trauma diverts your attention and energy to managing emotional responses, leaving little room for you to focus on your goals and tasks. It's like trying to run a marathon while carrying a backpack full of rocks. No matter how hard you try, the weight of trauma will always be weighing you down unless you find ways to lighten the load. But here's the good news. Your brain is incredibly adaptable. Even if trauma has caused significant changes in your brain function, you can reverse these effects. Evidence-based therapies, such as EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, and cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, can help reprogram these automatic brain responses. Practices such as mindfulness and meditation have also been shown to be effective in calming the amygdala, strengthening the prefrontal cortex, and restoring emotional balance. Furthermore, understanding how trauma affects your brain is a powerful step in itself. When you recognize that you are not lazy or incapable, but rather that you are dealing with the effects of something much bigger, you can begin to treat yourself with more compassion. And in doing so, you can gradually rebuild your productivity and your relationship with work and yourself. One of the biggest challenges in dealing with the effects of trauma on productivity is recognizing that it is there, silently influencing your actions, thoughts, and decisions. Many people struggle with procrastination, self-sabotage, or mental fatigue for years without realizing that these issues may be rooted in traumatic experiences. The first step to regaining control is learning to recognize the signs that trauma is impacting your daily life. Procrastination is one of the most common and yet most misunderstood signs of the impact of trauma. It may seem like you are just being lazy or disorganized, but procrastination is often your brain's response to fear or discomfort. When you avoid starting a task, it may be because it is triggering emotional triggers associated with the trauma, such as fear of failure, criticism, or even reliving feelings of inadequacy. Imagine that you have to present an important report at work. Even though you know exactly what to do, you feel paralyzed and unable to get started. This may be related to past experiences of harsh criticism or humiliation in similar situations. Trauma creates an unconscious association between the task and the possibility of suffering, prompting your brain to avoid the situation. Another sign is an inability to complete tasks, even simple ones. You may start a project with enthusiasm, but as the deadline approaches, you feel like you are running out of steam. This is because trauma consumes a disproportionate amount of mental and emotional energy. When your brain is busy dealing with intrusive thoughts or trying to anticipate all the possible risks of a task, there is little energy left over to actually do it. In addition, excessive self-importance, common in people who have suffered trauma, can turn relatively easy tasks into overwhelming undertakings. You find yourself repeatedly revising your work, trying to achieve an unattainable perfection, because you fear that any mistake will be catastrophic. Self-sabotage is another clear sign that trauma is interfering. This can take many forms. Starting something and giving up halfway through, putting off important commitments, or even making excuses for not trying something new. These behaviors are often linked to internalized negative beliefs, such as, "I'm not good enough," or "I can never do things right." These beliefs often have their roots in traumatic experiences that have undermined your confidence or self-esteem. For example, someone who grew up being told that they would never amount to anything may unconsciously avoid situations that challenge this belief. Even when opportunities arise, the fear of failure and of confirming this narrative prevents them from taking action. If you feel exhausted even after a good night's sleep, this could be another sign that trauma is affecting your productivity. Trauma keeps your body and mind in a constant state of alert, as if it's always waiting for a new threat. This state of hypervigilance drains your energy throughout the day, leaving little for the demands of work or personal life. Emotional fatigue can also result from constantly battling intrusive thoughts or painful memories. Each effort to ignore or get over these experiences consumes precious mental resources, contributing to feelings of burnout. Trauma is often accompanied by intrusive thoughts or flashbacks, which can come without warning. You're working on something important when suddenly an unpleasant memory from the past invades your mind, disrupting your concentration. Although these thoughts may seem unrelated, they are a sign that the trauma is still active in your brain, affecting your ability to focus on the present. Perfectionism is a sign of trauma that often goes unnoticed because it is seen as a positive quality. But when the desire to do everything perfectly prevents you from taking action, it becomes a problem. Trauma can create a need for absolute control as a way to avoid criticism or failure that has been painful in the past. This can lead to endless delays or an inability to tackle tasks that have even the slightest risk of error. Trauma can also manifest as a paralyzing fear of stepping outside your comfort zone. You may avoid new responsibilities at work or turn down opportunities that could boost your career. This happens because trauma teaches your brain to prioritize emotional safety above all else. Even when a situation is safe and advantageous, your mind may interpret it as a potential threat, causing you to withdraw. Recognizing these signs is an essential step in beginning to overcome the impacts of trauma. It's not easy to admit that something from your past is still influencing your present, but this recognition is the key to transformation. And most importantly, it's important to remember that these signs are not character flaws. They are normal responses to abnormal experiences. If any of these signs sound familiar, know that you are not alone. Many people face similar challenges, and there are strategies and tools that can help you deal with them. In the next installment, we'll explore some of these tools so that you can begin to build a path to recovery and regain your productivity. Overcoming the impact of trauma on your productivity may seem like a monumental task, but the good news is that there are practical, accessible strategies that can help you regain control of your life. The key is to approach trauma consciously, step by step, and with patience. Here are 5 essential strategies that you can start implementing today. The first step to overcoming the impact of trauma is acknowledging that it exists. Many people minimize or ignore traumatic experiences, believing that they weren't that bad or that they should have gotten over it by now. This denial only perpetuates the cycle, leaving the trauma lingering and silently influencing their actions. Acknowledging trauma doesn't mean reliving it, but rather accepting it as part of your history. Difficult experiences don't define who you are, but they can shape how you react to the world. Try to reflect on your emotions and behaviors. Why do you procrastinate? Why are you afraid of failing? Why do you freeze in certain situations? Often, these responses are connected to events that you may not have fully processed. A simple practice to validate your experiences is to write about them in a journal. Take 5 minutes each day to record how you feel and what may be triggering those emotions. This helps bring clarity and reduces the emotional weight that trauma can carry. Mindfulness is one of the most powerful tools for dealing with the effects of trauma. This practice teaches you to focus on the present, rather than getting lost in thoughts about the past or worries about the future. When you live in the now, you begin to create space between the trauma and your emotional response, allowing you to regain control. Start with something simple like mindful breathing. Take 2 minutes each day to close your eyes and focus solely on the air moving in and out of your lungs. If your mind wanders, and it will, gently bring your attention back to your breath. This practice strengthens your prefrontal cortex, helping to calm the overactive amygdala and, in turn, reducing symptoms of trauma-related anxiety. Another effective technique is grounding. When you feel like the trauma is triggering intense emotional responses, look around and identify 5 things you can see, 4 you can touch, 3 you can hear, 2 you can smell, and 1 you can taste. This simple exercise helps refocus your mind on the present and interrupt the cycle of intrusive thoughts. While practices like mindfulness are incredibly helpful, dealing with deep-seated trauma often requires professional help. Therapies like EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, and cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, are widely recognized for their effectiveness in treating trauma. A trained therapist can help you identify your trauma triggers and develop personalized strategies for coping with them. For example, you can learn how to reframe negative thoughts, replace limiting beliefs, and create a healthier relationship with work and productivity. If individual therapy isn't an option right now, consider joining a support group. Sharing your experiences with others who are facing similar challenges can be incredibly therapeutic and empowering. Trauma can make even simple tasks seem insurmountable, so one effective strategy is to break down large projects into smaller, more manageable steps. Instead of focusing on writing an entire report, start with something small, like outlining the main ideas or writing the first paragraph. Celebrating small victories is also important. Each completed step is a reminder that you can move forward, even when your trauma tries to convince you otherwise. Use to-do lists or digital tools to organize these steps, but don't overwhelm yourself. The idea is to create a sense of progress, not to increase your anxiety. Trauma and productivity are closely linked to your physical and emotional health, so creating consistent routines and taking care of your body are essential. Make sure you're getting enough sleep, eating a balanced diet, and exercising regularly. Physical exercise, in particular, has proven effects on reducing stress and improving mood. Try to establish a morning routine that includes self-care moments, such as meditation, stretching, or a walk outside. Starting your day calmly can help you feel more in control, preparing your mind to deal with the challenges that arise. Also, avoid multitasking. Trauma is already taxing on your mind, and trying to multitask will only add to the strain. Focus on one task at a time, giving yourself permission to work at your own pace. Overcoming the impact of trauma on productivity is not a linear process, but it is possible. The most important thing is to remember that you are not alone, and that, with the right tools, you can begin to rebuild your relationship with work, with your daily tasks, and most importantly, with yourself. These strategies are not magic bullets, but they are practical steps that over time can lead to significant changes. The most important thing is to get started. Remember, every small step forward is a victory, and every victory is a reminder that you are stronger than any traumatic experience you have faced.